Welcome, everybody, to the show Legal Candy, when I am your host, attorney Candice Colucci, and I'm here today with my co-host, MK, our content and amazing, extraordinaire content producer. Thank you for being with me today.
Thank you for having me again, Candice.
Perfect. So today we are going to go behind the mysterious headlines when it has to do with the unfortunate death of Matthew Perry, the star of the critically acclaimed and very popular show Friends, and what has taken place with the legal issues surrounding his death. So we're going to go into them, talk about who's just recently been charged and what that looks like, and what is the future in regards to what takes place if you supply illegal drugs and somebody dies. It is a extremely relevant concept, and it has a lot of complexities with what's taking place with people who are providing these illegal drugs. And the fact that back in the day, it was one thing, and now we are seeing that it's going to become probably more common that they're going to be charging as many people as they can surrounding the facts that if somebody gets drugs illegally and they end up overdosing or dying, or even maybe getting into a car accident and hurting somebody else, that the government and the police department are going to start tracing down of every single person who played any single role within this illegal drug ring or distribution. And so that is what has taken place now with the actor Matthew Perry. Matthew Perry, his death took place on October 28th, 2023 at the age of 54 years old. That is so young. It is so unfortunate. It was traumatizing, I think very, very devastating for his family, friends, and then people who are lovers of the show Friends. I mean, it was all over. Everybody was talking about it. And I think it's obviously so shocking because of how old he was. I mean, that's still very young, so much life left. But the events that surrounded his death, so the only thing that we knew at the time of his death was that he was found deceased in a hot tub at his house in California. And come to find out, when they did the autopsy report came back that he did have drugs in his body, that it was ketamine, that there was ketamine in his body, and the autopsy report says that there was enough ketamine that would have been the dosage that had been used for general anesthesia for a surgery. So that is how much he had in his body, that at the level of him taking it, if you're looking at it objectively, that it would have created some type of coma-like state. And what it looks like is that he had the drugs kind of administrated him through his personal assistant, then his personal assistant leaves, and then he ends up going, I guess, in the hot tub. And then probably once it all starts in, he actually ends up going to more than likely a coma and then actually drowns in the pool. But the cause of death is really actually, I think it was the actual ketamine. I don't know if it was the actual drowning. But so that being said, ketamine. And we've talked about ketamine before. So before we talk about the events surrounding, let's talk about this drug, because I think now that it's becoming very more popular as far as medical is concerned, but really more popular on the street drugs. What is it? So ketamine is a powerful anesthetic. It is used both medically and now we're finding out obviously recreationally. And so it's normally used to put somebody under anesthesia, like to put them to sleep. But it has also been used for pain control. People have been using it in order to suppress some of the pain that they're getting.
And depression.
So now there is people that are using it's being prescribed in order to treat depression. Mm-hmm. So the problems with it is a Schedule III controlled substance and drug that is prescribed legally by doctors. But the problem is now it's being abused on the streets and potentially being abused by doctors. What I thought was interesting when I first heard this story was that it reminded me a lot of our Maya Kowalski. Mm-hmm. Okay, so remember we talked about the show, the documentary was just absolutely moving. Was Maya Kowalski, and she was 9 years old when she started experiencing burning sensation in her limbs and symptoms of asthma. She ends up being diagnosed with complex regional pain syndrome, the CRPS, and what they're able to determine is that they start her on these prescription doses of ketamine in order to relieve her pain. She had massive amounts of pain where she would just be in pain all day, and her parents would take her to the hospitals, emergency room, doctors, everybody try to figure out what's wrong and figure out how they can actually kind of suppress this pain. And so ketamine became literally the pivotal issue in the story with Take Care of Maya, with what happened with Maya Kowalski, was about this ketamine. And so if you recall, what ended up happening was that she is getting ketamine dosages, but like anything when it comes to dosages of drugs, is that what I've always found interesting about it is that it's hard to say what the average dosage is for everybody, because there's so many factors that goes into play. In a dosage for someone of a drug, you're taking into effect their age, weight, health, all of those things, but you also have to take it into effect. What's the level of severity of the pain or any of the other stuff, or the depression? That will change the dosage. But also, what we know changes the dosage of any type of drug is how long you've been taking it, because that will create some sort of resistance to where, as you continue going forward, you need more and more and more in order to have the effects of the drug. So it's always interesting when we're talking about objectively, can you just look at someone and go, oh, that person was taking that many milligrams of the drug, that's too much. I don't really think you can. You have to look at it into case-by-case basis of really going through it. And where did we learn that? With Maya Kowalski. That was huge with Maya Kowalski, because what ends up happening is she was using the drug ketamine, but it got so intense that she also did kind of just an unorthodox procedure where it was a 5-day coma of ketamine. And this has been shown that there are times when they do this 5-day coma that has actually worked in patients to take the pain and put the pain in remission, which who would have thought? It's like using the terminology for cancer, is that there's something with some of these just outlandish symptoms and diseases and disorders and those kind of things where there are times when there's pain associated with it. This ketamine coma can literally like almost restart the body or do all these other things to where it puts the pain in remission. And for Maya Kowalski, these intense levels of ketamine were the only thing that happened to be working for her at the time. And if you recall, what ends up happening is she goes into a hospital because she's now having pain again. Her mother tells the doctor, hey doctor, I know I'm a nurse and I've been following my daughter's care for all of these years, and I'm telling you that I know exactly how many milligrams she needs of ketamine, and that's what you need to be giving her. I don't need you, as an emergency room, they're trying to figure it out. I don't need you to try to figure it out. I'm telling you, based on what I know of my daughter, what we've done in the fact, she needs this amount of ketamine. When they told her that, when she told the hospital this is how much she need, it immediately sparked the hospital going, no way. This woman has lost her mind. She's obviously drugging her daughter because the number was so high. So they were just like, there's no way you can give this girl's little body this much ketamine. And that is what sparked this entire issue with Maya Kowalski, was that ended up being the trigger that had them ended up calling social services in, because they believe that this mother was overdosing the child and that she may be potentially suffering from Munchausen syndrome. And based on that, they took custody of the daughter away from the mother. And then at the end of the day, as you guys recall, this mother was so devastated that she ended up committing suicide. And in order to save her daughter, she thought the only way that the rest of her family would ever see her daughter again, which by all intents and purposes was looking that way, was if she committed suicide. So the mother ended up committing suicide. They sue the hospital. At the end of the day, they find out that that prescription, the way that she had been given ketamine, was actually prescribed by another doctor. So the mother was not acting crazy. The mother was not out of it. That amount of ketamine was actually something that was helping her. And she ended up suing the hospital and getting an insane amount of money that will never bring back this mother. But the family did end up getting compensated for it. So
there's a litany of doctors involved in this Matthew Perry ketamine.
So that's the question, is that what ends up happening here is it's sometimes hard to figure out what's the actual dosage that's needed for a person who's utilizing it for something like pain, and now that they're using it for things like depression, what is the normal average dose, and can you look at it objectively and go, well, that's too much for that person, unless you're treating that person. So
and the ketamine coma almost allegedly saved Maya, but this ketamine coma killed Matthew
I think it has to do with where the ketamine coma happened. But it could, I think there's people out there that say that potentially a ketamine coma, maybe it could also, it's very helpful for depression, and that's what people are kind of saying. So what we do know is that it should be under the care of a doctor, but here's where things start to get tricky, is what all happened behind the scenes in regards to Matthew Perry. So what we know is that there has been 5 people arrested due to his death. And what I do think is that it's a double-edged sword. There are a lot of people, and unfortunately, we know somebody personal to this office who, unfortunately, her daughter died, and she was given illegal street drugs, and the mother tried to make a big deal about it and was demanding that there be some kind of consequences. And what's sad is, on a small level, no one does anything, right? No. So now we're dealing with Matthew Perry, who's obviously a celebrity, and so they're now doing what they should be doing potentially all the time, is really trying to track down where these drugs are coming from. So it's been finally given the light that I think it's needed to put a spotlight on and let everybody know, if you're selling drugs, somebody gets killed and hurt, it can potentially come back to you, which I think is a good message to potentially trying to mitigate it. But one of the other interesting things about Matthew Perry that I recognized was I remember when he first passed away, and so what ended up happening was he doesn't live far from his mother and his stepfather. And his stepfather is, I don't think you could write this. His stepfather is Keith Morrison from Dateline. I don't know if you know who he is, but I know who he is. So let me tell you who Keith Harrison is. If you've heard his voice, then I'm going to play it right here so that you know. Keith Harrison is the host of Dateline, and Dateline does all the investigation of the murders, mysteries, and all that stuff. And Keith Morrison. And his voice is one of the most beautiful voices in the whole world. But the thing is that he specializes in stories around murder and mystery. So I had no idea, but I'm watching the footage of the news that are literally surrounding his house minutes after his death. And who pulls up in a vehicle is Keith Morrison, and then a woman that looks like it's probably his wife. And he's talking to somebody else, and then nobody is saying, I'm like, what is Keith Morrison doing here? I'm like, now he investigates things and he shows up to the crime scene right away. I'm talking I think it was 30 minutes, 20 minutes later, he's there. And then that's when somebody says on the news, they're like, actually, Keith Morrison is a stepfather.
Wow.
So it was very I can only imagine the heartbreak it really was. I think he's been his stepfather for a very long time. To think that he does these stories on a day-to-day basis, and now here he is in the middle of a story that affects his own son.
So he was married to Matthew Perry's mother.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Wow.
So this is, let me see if I can get to it. Let me show you.
Hello, I'm Keith Morrison, and I'd like to tell you the beginning of a story.
Oh, good night.
Just a little bit of it. Give you an idea. The sun was setting on that last day. In the fading light, a tentative observer.
It's the way he said it, and it's the things he says all the time like this.
It should not have happened to her. The fun-loving college student known for her bubbly personality, her religious faith.
All the time.
Mm-hmm. She was just about to graduate, and yet here she was on the floor of her off-campus apartment.
Isn't that crazy? I know people. No one's talking about it, but I'm like, for me, that's one of the most intriguing parts of this whole story. Is I can't even believe that is Keith that was Keith Morrison was his stepfather, and now we're in the middle of a huge story, and they happen to live just a couple of blocks over from Matthew Perry, so they got the call and they came immediately. And so now it's given it an insane light, and now we are seeing some of the aftermath of what took place. And so here is what has taken place very recently, is that there has been an arrest, and the arrest is of 5 people. And we're like, wow, 5 people. 2 doctors. So the 5 people are Dr. Salvador Palencia, Dr. Mark Chavez, and then Jasvine Senghai, Eric Fleming, and Kenneth Iwasama. And so those are the 5 people that they believe all work together to conspire in order to provide the illegal amounts of ketamine to Matthew Perry that ended up resulting in his death. So the people are 2 doctors, and then we have Jasvine Senghai, and what are they calling her?
The ketamine queen.
The ketamine queen of North Hollywood.
Yeah.
Imagine what that's going to unravel, because she is now in custody, and I think they denied her bond, but then what that's going to unravel about the potentials of how many people are getting these drugs off the streets is going to be remarkable, because it's probably going to lead to a bunch of other people. And then we have Kenneth, who is actually the personal assistant of Matthew Perry that lives with him in his house. And I guess it's not the craziest uncommon thing, but Matthew Perry was unmarried, no children, and so had his assistant living in his house, which what it looked like, as we have unraveled and seen, is that Kenneth at various times was the one who actually administered the drug into Matthew Perry's arms, or whatever, I guess wherever it was at, and was allegedly the one who actually administered the final dose on the day of his death. Now, what are some of the charges that have taken place? One of the charges that they've been charged with is conspiracy to distribute ketamine. And let me tell you what the elements of the conspiracy are. So when we're talking about a conspiracy, we look at several different things. So for a conspiracy to exist, there must be an explicit or implied agreement between two or more individuals to engage in the distribution of legal substance. There has to be an intent. So you need an intent of the parties, that they have an intent to carry out this plan, which is to provide drugs, and an overt act. And that means that when they're looking at all the elements, there has to be one step, one overt act that takes place in furtherance of the plan. Anything that happens, as long as there's one thing that happens that pushes forth the actual plan, that's enough to create a conspiracy. Then you have to have knowledge. Everybody has to have knowledge of what this actual plan is to distribute drugs. And that's what you're looking for. So when people say conspiracy, conspiracy is not all that hard to prove. So if you and a bunch of your friends are all sitting there talking about, oh, we should do this or we should do that, and then anyone in the group takes one act forward. So like a lot of times when we talk about this in a criminal setting, we're saying, like, let's say the plan with your friends is to rob a bank, and you're sitting there and you're talking about robbing a bank. That's you've got two or more people who are all coming together to come up with a plan. And then what happens if anyone does the next step, which means to rent the rental car you plan on using, just to go and buy the weapons. Any of those things is enough to create the conspiracy of it. You don't have to actually complete the actual crime. It doesn't ever have to complete it. The conspiracy alone, the plotting and planning alone, and the one step in furtherance is enough for conspiracy. So it is a great cause of action, a great charge to be able to try to hold everybody responsible, regardless or not if the actual end result happens, but also to hold everybody responsible regardless of their role.
And that word carries so much weight. Yeah. Just the word conspiracy.
Everyone's like, oh
my goodness.
Yeah. It's a
bad word.
It's definitely utilized, especially in stuff like this. Like when you see gang activities or using the word conspiracy, when you're doing things like drug activity like this, there's the words you see, conspiracy, those kind of things. So that is, all of them have been charged with that. And then the other things is we've got some people, there's a doctor who's been charged with distribution of ketamine. Now remember, he's a doctor. He can prescribe ketamine, but the issue is going to be, is the amount that he gave him. Is he prescribing an illegal amount? And then we also have this doctor who's being charged with falsifying documents related to the investigation. Because when a doctor prescribes a drug, he has to keep record of it. And I would assume part of these accusations are the fact that he fabricated records, because he's probably not putting it on paper. Yeah, he's not putting it on paper exactly how much he's technically prescribing, or he's changing documents, not submitting it the right way, so it doesn't look like it's so much. Because if it had been, it could potentially be flagged, and then he gets stopped. And so he's getting drugs from several different places. He's getting them for doctors that are abusing their position, but he's also getting them from on the street, because at some point in time, I think we learned, I didn't know very much about it before. I was a fan of Friends. I did watch Friends for years, and so I just hadn't kept along with Matthew Perry. I had no idea that he suffered from severe depression and addiction issues even during the show, after the show, and up until the day he died. He's been to rehab.
And he was allegedly sober.
Yeah.
Like, he'd just come off that big press tour promoting his book, saying that he was sober and he's finally clean. And that one gentleman that was living with him was supposed to be his sober companion.
Yeah, lies.
Basically, yeah.
It's all lies. That's what it is. Yeah.
It is.
Unfortunately, that's what that was. Because it's he's a documented history. When they pulled his text messages and everything, he was engaging in it. He was asking for it. He had code names for the drugs.
Yep.
He's paying people. So come to find out, in the last 2 months before his death, he spent around $60,000. $60,000 on ketamine, which just meant that everyone was taking advantage of him. And I think one of the things that enraged the police department and the public was, I think that statement that you had read is that they've got all the text messages from everybody involved, and a doctor has a text message that said, what did it say?
It said, how much do you think we can get from this moron?
Isn't that crazy? It is such an insult to injury. And that's really what I think that the police department and who made the statement and had really kind of unraveled what took place, what they were really honing in on is that their position is that they believe that these doctors and these people took advantage of somebody who was an addict, recovering addict, and knew that he had a weakness. And that's what happens. That's what drug dealers do. They know they have a weakness, so then all of a sudden they use supply and demand. They're like, you want it? Well, then I'm going to take advantage of the fact how much you want it. And then they start charging insane amounts of money. And so I think that was probably one of the factors that was really became insanely egregious, is that a doctor would be saying that, would just be saying, how much can we get from this moron? Like, it's horrible to think, because the moron is you. Addiction is a real thing. Yeah. And for you as a doctor to not recognize addiction, and then to figure out how you're going to monetize addiction, is what that they were doing, becomes a massive issue. And the reason why doctors in the celebrity world are different to some degree of how they engage in business is a different practice than doctors in everyone else's normal world. In our normal world, we have to go see a doctor. There's an insurance plan that pays them. If we're paying them directly, there's a fee that we know before we get in there. But in the celebrity world, they have private doctors. And those doctors can make any type of fees that they want. There's no limitation on what they can charge, right? They can come and do a house visit and charge $20,000 if they want. If the client is willing to pay it, then that's what they'll pay. And that's why there's a little bit of a difference of what's taking place here than what you normally would see. It isn't uncommon for celebrities to have a relationship with doctors that they pay them directly for things like prescriptions and those kind of things, and they pay way more than market value on anything. But to see a text message like that just says, what do you think we can get out of him, this moron? It was so disappointing. It was so disappointing that anyone would say that about somebody else, but definitely as a doctor saying it about a client. So the allegation that they're all working together in order to fuel this weak man's position, because he's a recovering addict or an addict at the time, and now they're all charged criminally because the end result is he dies. What I thought was interesting about these charges is that we have seen these conspiracy charges in this situation, but what I thought was interesting is they didn't charge any of them with manslaughter, which that is usually what we've seen before. So if you remember with Michael Jackson. So Michael Jackson, the cause of death for him was that propofol, and that is a drug similar to ketamine in the fact that it's used to sedate people like an anesthesia. I think it actually is very much stronger than ketamine, I think. And it was being administered to him and prescribed to him from his family, his doctor he had on salary, the doctor he had forever.
Dr. Murray.
Yeah. But they charged Dr. Murray with manslaughter, involuntary manslaughter. And so manslaughter, the concept of manslaughter is that pretty much you knew or should have known that your actions could have led to death or serious injury. That's what kind of the requirements on an average state, that's what it's usually looking like, is that you did something that you should know or you did know that could have caused these results, yet you didn't do anything differently. And so involuntary, there's two versions of manslaughter, involuntary and voluntary. And so a lot of those, they kind of looks at the culpabilities of the actions. Voluntary is something that you're doing that there's more intention involved in it. And involuntary sometimes is that there is no intention there. You're doing something, but then yes, you should have known or should have known, but there's no intention that would have caused those results.
So why weren't they charged? What do you think?
And what I think in this instance is that it's to the discretion of the state attorney to decide, state attorney and the police department, to decide how they're going to charge somebody. But remember, we've talked about this before. They can change the charges. So the charges can be upgraded. So they may have only had enough evidence right now to know that there's enough text messages, that there's a distribution ring here. They are calling a distribution ring, that there's a ring here that all these people are committing conspiracy. And they may be waiting to continue their investigation, which happens, in order for them to determine if they think that it's going to rise to the level of manslaughter. But I can tell you already, with the way that they have pled these things and the way that the facts, is that absolutely more than one of these, like the assistant who administered the drug, he could easily be charged with manslaughter, right? Because he knew or should have known that that level of ketamine would have caused that. Now, what I think might be their issue is that with Michael Jackson, it was one doctor doing all of that. One doctor prescribing it, one doctor giving it to him, one doctor, like that doctor was like literally like a doctor over his shoulder. He put him to bed by injecting him, and then he would go to sleep, and then he would monitor him throughout the night. But I think here they're probably trying to put it together to where who was the one individually responsible. Like if the first doctor only gave him some ketamine, second doctor gave him some, the queen of ketamine gave him some, and then you have his assistant who's injecting some,
right.
Then it's like, who's really the one ultimately responsible for the actual death, you know? So maybe the first doctor never prescribed him enough that he could have died from, you know? So I think that those maybe are the issues why, but make no mistake, it can be amended to have the manslaughter charge added. And in situations that are similar to this, that is what they are charging drug dealers, people who are the runners for drug dealers, anyone, the person who put them in contact, the friend who put the friend in contact with the drug dealer, they can charge every single person for manslaughter or conspiracy, any of those kind of things. So that is a public service announcement to tell your kids, tell your friends, tell people who aren't your friends, to let everybody know that this is going to be a new angle to try to really have a war on the illegal drugs and try to mitigate that and try to stop it. So that's really what we're kind of seeing here. So they've all been charged, and now it's opening the floodgates. Like I said, I am interested to see what will take place in regards to like this queen, this ketamine queen, and she was like blonde hair, beautiful, like she's just living her best life.
I saw her. I couldn't believe,
Oh, they already started talking about all her luxuries. She was living.
But I wonder what she's gonna come up with. You know,
she's supposed to have high-end clients. There's no telling what they're gonna find through her text messages, all the kind of different things that she's been a part of. How many people is she supplying these drugs to? And
these people, like, why are these famous people doing ketamine?
Yeah.
It's just, to me, it's like unheard of.
Yep.
I'd never really heard of it.
Me neither. Until Amaya.
Yeah.
And that's the question.
Now
It's like, let's just say, and that's why you're really supposed to wait till all the evidence comes out and they're proven guilty to really make an opinion, because we've seen this before with Maya. If they looked at the dosage that Maya was given, and that was enough for them to take custody of Maya away from the mother and to accuse her of potentially drugging her child and threaten her with criminal charges for how much of the ketamine that she was allowing to be administered to her daughter. And then we come to find out that no, it was a normal amount. It was the necessary amount for her at that time, right?
It's her tolerance.
Yeah. So there's no telling that once it could potentially be, it happens here, is that maybe doctor number 2 was prescribing a lot, but if come to find out that he had been taking it for years, his tolerance level was here. And remember, if you're an addict, recovering addict, your tolerance level is pretty high for things.
And if you're a famous, wealthy, recovering addict, and you're telling people what to do, and you're paying them.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So it may be determined, there may be a gray area of what these doctors was prescribing. Maybe the prescription that they were given was the normal amount for him as a person, but for anyone else who's hasn't had a history with drugs, it may seem just astronomically high. So that'll be interesting to see how they kind of unravel that part of it. But really, I think one of the biggest issues was looking at every single person individually and saying that we've got to find a way to stop the illegal activity of drug use. And that's really because of the fact that doctors with the knowledge and the experience should be the one that are actually prescribing the medication based on you individually and changing dosages based on what's happening to you one way or the other. You shouldn't be getting them on the street corner and then trying to diagnose yourself of how much you can use or not use, because that's what ultimately happened here. Ultimately, Matthew Perry and his assistant made a decision more than likely on how much he should be taking there. And so what they've said is that the assistant administers him a dosage of the ketamine, then leaves, which is just insane to think. Like, where are you going? I would think that you're his assistant now, and you're giving him drugs. You would think that he would be staying there to make sure that this guy stays alive, and then even more crazy. He ends up going in the hot tub.
He prepares the hot tub, and then he leaves to go do errands after injecting
Which just brought me back to with my Whitney Houston. Whitney Houston. I mean, what is it? What is the thing with going in a tub of water?
I don't know.
Is there something? Maybe there's something about it that's that's like a euphoria feeling. Like maybe if you're high like that, the heat or the feeling of it. I mean, I don't know. I try not to even go in a bathtub. I love bathtubs.
Yeah.
And I try not to go in a bathtub if I'm super tired. Because I remember all the time. There's been so many times my great grandma used to
fall asleep
always
in the tub.
Don't fall asleep in the tub was probably the number one thing I heard in my childhood.
I'd be terrified.
I used to always think, and now as you're older, you're thinking, if you fall asleep and you're in the tub and you're not on drugs, the minute that you start to drown, I'm pretty sure it may wake you up. So I really think that the admonishment was don't take drugs and fall asleep in the tub. But I remember all the time having a panic that I was going to fall asleep. I'm like, as soon as I was like, I'm like, get out,
I feel a little sleepy.
Yeah, I'm like, wake up. No, I had one of those pillows for a little while, and I was like, no, the pillow's making it way too comfortable. I was like, I'm definitely going to fall asleep in here.
It's so funny. Mine did the same thing.
I think they want you out of the bathtub. I think they
don't fall asleep.
I think they don't want to stress about you being in the bathtub. Like I really don't know, because I'd like to know if anyone has ever fallen asleep in a bathtub without any drugs.
Please call.
Please let us know. Let us know, because maybe we should be admonishing and really warning people.
Public service announcement.
Maybe warning people about that. So what?
And they also deleted the incriminating text messages the doctors did following the death, and they expressed confidence that they could avoid detection. That was part of it too. So
that is. And so what also took place legally, which I thought was pretty interesting, was after they were all arrested. So what happens is you get arrested, and then they get arrested, and then they have to go and get arraigned. So arraigned means you go before the judge, and the judge is going to ask you, are you pleading guilty or not guilty? That's like the very first stage of it all. And then they'll talk about setting a bond. Are they going to release you on bond? How much is that bond going to be? And so one of the things that took place is that one of the doctors, and this happens sometimes too, is that now you've got doctors that have been arrested. So the question is, are these doctors seeing patients? And so one of the doctors, Dr. Palencia, his attorney argued that wanted to make the position that he needed to still be able to see his patients in the practice once he'd been released. He was given $100,000 bond, which means in most cases you get a bondsman, you post 10% of that, and then it'll allow you to be released. So he gets released, and that's what his attorney is asking the judge. And what he says is that, he should still be able to see patients in order to keep his practice alive, because remember, he's still innocent until proven guilty, and that he's already turned over his DEA license to prescribe dangerous drugs, and that the Perry case was isolated, which is still yet to be known until we get all the discovery out. We don't know if this is an isolated event or not. But the state attorney said that essentially he acted as a street corner drug dealer and objected to him being able to see patients. Now, the judge, Sagar, ruled that the doctor could treat patients, this is interesting, could treat patients while he was out on bond, only if they sign a document saying that they had been informed of the charges against him.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
That is.
Isn't that interesting? I
didn't even know that was a thing.
Yeah, no, I mean, when you think about it, it's like, we're thinking about someone being innocent until proven guilty. If he is innocent until proven guilty, then when he does get released, if it means he can't see any patients at all, then there is an issue there with his entire business falling apart. What I would say is that I will be surprised if his licensing board of his, like when you're a lawyer or a doctor, that is a privilege to have that license. So at any point in time, they can issue an emergency suspension of your license that's different than the actual court of law. So right now, because technically your license is being regulated by a quasi-judicial system. So even though this judge in this case has said that he can go back and he can work on patients, but he now has turned in he can't prescribe any medicine, any dangerous drugs, but there could at any point in time be the medical board can issue an emergency suspension pending a review of the facts that took place, which would probably be something that may happen for both of those doctors. That is common to take place. But if you were in that position, what do you think you would do? Do you think that you would see a doctor? If you were seeing a doctor and you found out that he was charged with this, do you think that you would continue seeing him?
Do you think if you had that form in front of you, would you sign that form? Like I'm just like, I don't think I'd sign that form.
Yeah, I would be, as an attorney, I think you're actually
a little hesitant.
And I think that you're signing away. I think you're technically, you're almost signing away your rights to some degree. You're now admitting that you've been put on notice that he has done something allegedly illegal and overprescribed somebody and took advantage of them and all these other things. And so if you're signing this and then it ends up that he overprescribes to you,
that's it.
Then you have less of a likelihood to ever be able to sue him because you've been put on notice of his actions. So it is very interesting that this is what the judge would rule, is that they sign these kind of piece of paper. But I can also kind of see where the judge comes from because you don't know what kind of care he's giving these people. So what if someone's in the middle of some kind of, well, I mean, it's like I really don't think, I mean, what care, since he's already given away his license to prescribe medicine, I'm not even sure of what kind of care he'd be given that could be so intense to where if he wasn't able to do it, there would be high consequences. Like if he was still giving medication, I can understand. If somebody was under intense care with him and all of a sudden he can't practice anymore, that could be detrimental to people. But if he can't prescribe medication, I guess it all depends on what all he's doing. I mean, I don't know. I don't think I would be okay with it at this point in time. Yeah. If because of the allegations that are there, it would kind of make me, I would not be okay with it if that text message came from him. If the text message was, how much can we get this moron to pay? I would just be like, you lack empathy. You're a doctor. It should not be how much you can get an idiot to pay for your medical services, which should not be based on how much somebody is willing to pay for your services. It shouldn't really be that way. So that is extremely disappointing. And it'll be interesting. I'm interested to see when Keith Morrison's going to do a story on it. I think he's very involved. So he is super involved with investigations. When he does his stories about, any type of story that he does, I know from the background of what I've heard about him is he really does get involved and meets with several people in order to understand what really took place. He likes to know who these people are. So I could only imagine the level of involvement he has in this, and then to watch it ultimately kind of unravel and to see people held responsible, I'm sure, is very vindicating for the family. But I really do hope if this is something that is successful here, like it's been successful in other places, that it continues to be utilized, and not just in a sense where there's a celebrity involved, but really trying to get to track some of these things. Like a big area of dispute is that it happens all of the time, is what they're finding out. Obviously, there's so many parents who have this exact story of my son or daughter got into an accident, was prescribed medication, and the dosage was so high that my child became addicted to it and never recovered. Yeah. And so where will the line be drawn, and how many more people are going to be held responsible in this exact way? And I remember when we talked about, I remember when it happened with Dr. Murray, it was very controversial. I think people really did question, what is the standard? Because if he had lived and he hadn't died that night, was he giving him a dose that was unreasonable for him? Because by all kind of accounts with Michael Jackson is they had said that he had several issues going on at one time, and I guess they said he couldn't sleep at all. He wasn't sleeping, and that he needed this in order to sleep. So I always was intrigued with wanting to know what ended up happening, arguably kind of the whole entire the situation of was it an accident? Was it just the fact that he gave him a dosage that should have been okay, and then other things happened and he ended up dying? Because had he been in a hospital under anesthesia, there are people who die under anesthesia for various different reasons. A heart murmur nobody knew about, just all these different things that are sometimes. That's why you sign that form. Yeah, there's all of these different reasons. Yeah. So the question's always going to come down to what was the standard of care for these doctors, but how much will we be expanding this? Will we be expanding it to the manufacturer? That's been a question people's asked before. Is there the appropriate
like the
warnings?
Pharma family like that? So
where does the line stop?
Yeah.
So if there's a recommended dosage and someone's creating that and it continues to change based on the circumstances, and then somebody dies from it, then how far back does this chain of events happen to where everybody along the line is potentially responsible? Where does it start and where does it end? Because it's highly unfortunate what happens, but I've heard this story so many times, and I haven't heard of a lot of doctors getting arrested over the situation of how they're prescribing. But I do know it happens. So it will be interesting to see will this kind of re-spark? Because the police department, I think it was the state attorney who announced these charges. I think it was the police department who did it. He had a message for people. He was just like, I'm coming for you, is pretty much what this officer has said. I'm trying to see who he was. Where he just goes, listen, anyone who's watching this, if you are giving illegal drugs to other people and they die, I'm coming for you. That was literally what he said. So
Keith Morrison issued a statement. Do you want me to read his statement? Because I know how you feel for him. The Dateline NBC correspondent says, We were and still are heartbroken by Matthew's death, but it has helped to know law enforcement has taken his case very seriously. We look forward to justice taking its course, and we're grateful for the exceptional work of the multiple agencies whose agents investigated Matthew's death. We're hoping unscrupulous suppliers of dangerous drugs will get the message. That was...
Aww.
I know. It's sad.
Heartbreak for any other people who have gone through this, as we have it close to our heart. So, we will dedicate, all as many prayers as we can to the family members of people that are going through this now, dealing with family members that are addicted because of the drug rings that exist and getting illegal drugs off the streets, and also getting drugs from prescriptions. Mm-hmm. And then also specifically to our near and dear to our heart of an employee whose daughter died just recently under very similar circumstances. And so, and it was a question, and I think it has been questioned very much, it was how intentional it was of what took place. But unfortunately, she passed away from, she was an addict, and she had been recovering. It's the exact thing. She had been recovering, and then just had a night where she ended up going off with, the wrong people. And then come to find out, she ended up overdosing in a seedy hotel, which is where a lot of them end up at. And the questions that has been asked is who's responsible for that, And I understand there is a level of responsibility that goes on the actual person. I completely understand that. But it's always... there's other people that are culpable too, but ultimately you're an adult. You should make your decisions, but you are more vulnerable when there's an addiction there, and people around you who've got their mind right, that are also feeding that addiction. There should be some level of culpability to those people. So that being said, our hearts go out to all of the family members and all of the people that are in the middle of the struggle. And if you need help, please reach out for help. And if you have any questions, comments, or concern, remember we've got a law firm, Colucci Law Group. Please reach out to us. What's our phone number?
727-733-9438.
Perfect. And
Your rights are our fight.
Your rights are our fight. Always. Email us, ask us any questions, anything you need, and we hopefully will be able to guide you in the right direction. If we can't help you, please have a safe time and be careful about who you surround yourself with. And what does he say?
Go out. We will be here for you.
It's so sad.
I know. Brought
what
so much joy.
I'll be
there for you.
I like that. Yep. There it is.
Aww. And he's dancing.
We'll see you next time.
Thank you.